Hello, everybody, and welcome to my review of Division 2 Warlords of New York. In this video, I would like to address the pros and cons of Tom Clancy's The Division 2, specifically the new expansion, Warlords of New York. I will do this from the perspective of a player before and after the launch of the expansion. The topics I will cover will include the systems, the changes to the systems, their pros and cons, and other important aspects of this expansion. I will not be discussing the PvE aspect of the game, however, as I did not play it before the expansion, and my experience after the expansion is limited to only about an hour or so of play. I will, however, give my honest and unbiased opinion on the subjects mentioned previously as it relates to team play and the PvE aspects of the game. I should also say that I don't believe any one thing discussed is all bad or all good in regard to these topics, so there will both be pros and cons for each one. That does not mean that the total of the pros and cons will be equal by the end of this video, however, as some topics have more pros and some topics have more cons. Um, that's just the way things work. The first system I would like to go over is the core attribute system. So, if I pull up my stats screen here, you will notice that I have three sections under the highly colorful UI element of blues, yellows, and reds. In the previous system, you had 2 out of 3 that were the same. You had your damage, your armor and health, and your skill tier. Damage is pretty self-explanatory. That's how much damage you do with any given weapon you are using. Armor is also pretty explanatory. Like most games, it represents your damage mitigation. Both of those aspects are the same before and after the expansion. We do have a change, however, when it comes to skill tier. Now, you can't really tell from my build because obviously I am using a full damage mitigation or tank build currently. Skill tier used to be known as skill power. It was a flat number, much like damage and armor. You would have a piece of gear. You would have, for example, 500 skill power, and that would determine how much damage, how much health, how much of these things that your skills had. This is actually a two-part system with skill tier, or at least I am co-joining them for this topic. The first being that with this new skill tier system, if you go into any given skill, does not matter which one, you will notice that it will list changes that occur as you gain those tiers. You have the base stats at level 0 of the skill, and then every tier that you go up, you get changes. So, for example, this special hive I'm using from one of the quote-unquote classes of the game, you gain charges, efficiency, health, and refresh rate for this skill every tier. And there's also an overcharge system, which means that certain gear will allow you to overcharge those skills if it was previously tier 6. The goal being making skill builds more equal to damage builds and tank builds. The second part of this skill system is the skill mod system. So if I go in here and I mod, now you will notice I have this 4.2% shield mod on here. Now before the new system, the way the old system worked was dependent on your skill power, determine the skill mod that you could place on any given skill. So you would have a requirement for the mod, let's say 3,500 skill power. That would give you like 120% bonus health to your shield. This is not the case, however, as they have pretty severely reduced the effectiveness of skill mods, in the fact that these mods give you a bonus based on the level 0 version of that skill. For example, if I equip this 4.2% shield health, that is giving me the 4.2% shield health based on the default health of this shield, not my current 13 million from my 6th skill tier shield. If it was, it would be giving me around, I did the math earlier, 557, so 500,000 health. Instead, it only gives me 272 to 383, about 111,000, which is congruent to the 2-3 million that the shield has initially. So yes, they completely and utterly, whether intentionally or unintentionally, nerfed the skill mod system, making them pretty much useless, especially for the shield. I won't say all skills, but the shield in particular is rough. I'll show you one more example. At a skill tier 1, this turret has 36,203 damage. Now, if I equip this and mod it, rather than getting let's say 4% damage on that 36,000, I'm actually getting the 4% on the base damage of the skill, not the current value. Same across all skills. So I will be giving this the new core stat system, armor damage, blah blah blah. The pro is the skill tier system in general. It's much easier to understand, much easier to build around. The cons, you have less build diversity. So what I mean by this con is that you used to be able to, say, on a shield, have low overall health, high ridiculous shield regen for these weaker health shields. You can no longer have that. It's just a sad fact. They're pretty much locked in at their base stats and what you gain from the skill tier. The mods are ineffective, as I showed. So that is the core base system. The next thing I want to go over is the talent system, because it also has to deal with gear. The old system, previous to Warlords of New York, was that you had a talent, which is attached right now to this chest piece and this backpack, on every piece of gear, and 3 on each weapon. So you would have 3, 6, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 talents in total. 17 if you were using certain exotic pieces of gear. And So the way that these talents would work is they increase the power of your builds, and you had 15 instances of an increase in power, or tankiness, or skills, or whatever you wanted to do. In the new system, they removed these talents from 4 of the pieces of gear, limiting them to your chest piece and your backpack, and 1 talent per weapon. And this includes most exotics, which I will cover in the loot section. This is roughly a 66% decrease in player power, just flat out, no matter what build you're going for. And that's because these, like, outside of your base, your core stats, your core attributes, weapon damage, armor, and skill tiers, these talents are the primary way that you increase your damage. Like, these effects are supposed to be powerful. They're supposed to be the reason that your gear is special. Unfortunately, without those on 4 of the 6 pieces of gear and reducing the number from 3 to 1 on weapons, it's a huge reduction in power for the player. So for this system, I would say that my pros are that it is much easier to use and understand, so ease of use. And your con is going to be that it's a massive reduction in power. Massive reduction. The next system I want to cover is gear mods. Now, much like skill mods, these go on your gear. It used to be that a majority of your gear, I can't remember if it was all 6 or not, but you had more. Now they have limited it to your chest piece, your mask, and your backpack. What this means is that you've taken at least 1 or 2 of these away, which is a pretty substantial reduction. But that's not the only thing. They've also reduced what you can get for these mods. So there used to be all kinds of stuff. For damage mods, you could get specific weapon damage, you could get explosive damage, you could get bleed damage, you could get burn damage. There was a wide variety of things that you had on these mods to enhance your build. They removed a lot of them, and I think it's limited to maybe 4 types of mods per archetype. So you have like 4 defensive types, 4 offensive types, and 4 skill types. For instance, right now, I have 3. I have protection from elites, which means elites do less damage to me. Incoming repairs, which means I get healed for more from healing skills. And armor on kill. This is a pretty high roll for this one, 16,000, and that is less than 1% of my armor. If I multiplied this by 3, it is still less than 1% of my total armor of 1.8 million. That's just how it pans out mathematically. It would take me 180,000 would be, well, no, I guess it's about 1% per mod slot. So I could get 3% if I dumped all of these in there, but I would be sacrificing these protection from elites, which is needed at higher difficulties. So that there's a reduction there in player power too, as well as a reduction in possible build variety. just because there's less options for your mods, that's one less thing that you were able to kind of specifically target one play style. So my pros and cons for this, once again, much easier to understand, much easier to grasp. Con, once again, up power reduction for the player. And they took the most important damaging stat away from mods that you could get, which was damage to elites. From both this system and... Well, no, I guess I'll cover that in the next section. Okay, so the next one I want to cover is your secondary stats. So your secondary stats are these attributes. They're called just regular attributes. So on my mask I have skill haste. The protection from elites is the mod slot, obviously. On this mask I have crit hit chance, crit hit damage. This is, it works pretty much similar to the way it did before, where it's like every piece of gear that drops, it's a random roll for a random stat. I do believe there's a limited pool that, depending on the core attribute, it can roll now. I'm not entirely sure, considering this is also a defense mask and it has an offensive secondary stat on there. But ultimately, it's the same. The only difference in this aspect now is that on each piece of gear you have these bars that you can clearly see how good or bad that roll is. In this case, it's a little bit above half of the maximum that it can roll. I'd say probably 55 or 60% of the maximum. And that's not a horrible roll. However, if I go to like this piece where it's like, okay, I got above average on one with the good 75 percentile on crit hit chance, but I got a 25 percentile roll on my headshot damage, that piece of gear I probably wouldn't keep. I do believe I got another one somewhere. Yeah, okay, here's the holster. Bad rolls. Bad rolls. You can't get higher than one skill tier, so that's always maxed. Skill haste, way bad roll, and headshot damage is still below the average. 50%, so not great. It works the same way as it did before. Is a piece of gear rolls, you get the stat randomly. I would say that this has a pro of it is easier to it's a more streamlined stat system, as they removed certain stats that could roll on everything and assigned each stat you can get to each individual type of gear. So the system overall is more streamlined. That's the pro. And the con is you get the loss of the most important damage stat that you could get, which was the damage to elites. I know I said this for the previous one, but the damage to elites was a powerful stat in the previous version of the game. It was a little overpowered. I don't exactly understand why they removed it completely instead of just like cutting it in half, given how powerful it was. But it equates to just more loss of power for the player. They also kind of balance themselves out by raising what you could get for some stats and lowering what you could get for other stats. It's pretty self-explanatory. The next topic I want to come to is loot. And in the previous version, you had a lot of loot, but it wasn't very good quality. Their solution to this for Warlords of New York was that they would decrease the overall loop drop rate and increase the rolls that you could get on that particular piece of gear. It sounds good, however, it kind of missed. And without making this video long by showing you longer than it already will be by showing you me doing an activity, I'm going to go ahead and just explain. So before, you would have every enemy would drop something. Now every enemy has like a 30 to 50% chance based on which type of enemy they are to drop something, I would say. And we're not getting any better quality for higher difficulties. I can still get a bottom 10% percentile roll on any given stat on any given piece of gear that an enemy drops with a much harder enemy with a much lower drop rate. So the pros is you have much less clutter on your screen at any given time from just tons of things everywhere. The cons are it was a failure of concept. I understand and respect what they were trying to do. It missed the mark. They locked certain items behind certain difficulties, specifically an exotic. And your exotics just don't feel powerful anymore. This is a combination of your stats, the stat system that they in place, but mostly the talent system. By removing most of the talents on weapons, they did this for exotics as well, under the premise that they wouldn't change the way that they worked. But to give you an example, this was not what we got. For example, this exotic pistol that I had at level 30, the old talent allowed you to do extra damage. It had 3. 1 highlighted enemy weak points, so like grenade bags or drone packs or whatever that enemy's weak spot was, and the gun would do extra damage to those weak spots, which allowed you to destroy them easier, which kind of gave you an advantage over that enemy. And secondly, well, it had a second talent. I can't remember exactly what it is, but they changed it. They said that they would not change the way that the exotics functioned, but this is a perfect example of they did exactly that. This pistol now does not have that extra damage to weak points. It does not highlight them at all, and instead you gain a stack on hits up to 30, and headshots consume all stacks, repairing your shield by 3% per stack. Well, okay, that's cool, kind of. But this particular pistol has horrible accuracy, and it jumps all over the place. Hitting headshots is ridiculously hard with this pistol, especially if you're on console. Another example of this is the Dodge City holster. They completely removed what it used to do, which was as long as you were using a pistol, you got a bunch of stat increases. If it was a revolver, you got 20% extra sidearm damage on top of those other stats. And it was a bad mamma jamma holster before. Now I have quick draw, which is while your pistol is holstered, gain a stacking buff every 0.5 seconds up to 100. When you swap to it, your first shot consumes the buff and deals 10% damage per stack. This item used to be one of the best holsters that you could use as a shield user, because you would equip a revolver, even if it had 6 shots, the stat bonuses you got, such as stability and accuracy, this combined with that Liberty pistol, amazing. But because they changed the core way that these exotics function, I will never go for a level 40 dodge at a gunslinger's holster, and I will never go for like a level 40 Liberty. It's because it's just not worth it. It's not. As a pistol user, I am much better suited for this, and that's why that is a con on this loot, because the exotics just don't feel powerful anymore. They're garbage. They're supposed to be the best items in the game. They're not. More often than not, you're going to either use these gear set items, which they did buff and are better now, but are not working properly. And I'll give you an example. My white buff, my white debuff on this set is supposed to give me and my allies 5% of our armor back every second that we shoot that enemy. It doesn't work for anybody I'm playing with. It only affects me. It just doesn't work. And that's unfortunate. So the next topic I'm going to cover is, once again, loot, pros, less clutter on screen, cons, failure concept, locking an exotic behind difficulty, and exotics don't feel powerful. The next thing I want to cover is the recalibration bench. This is their big system that they wanted to introduce for Warlords of New York. Like, this is supposed to change the game, like the grind, significantly. Yes and no. Because loot is broken right now, it kind of has an effect on the system. This system is great because you can take all those attributes that you find on weapons and store them and constantly get better and better rolls that you can use infinitely on any item that you find. However, you will notice this depends on your RNG. So, like, my RNG with pistols, which is primarily what I use, I haven't had the greatest luck. I got a few high stats. I got one max stat. Most of them are still pretty low. Not great. I don't have all the talents. It's just like my RNG in this one, not great. And if you look at my body armor, however, my chest pieces, I have all but one maxed stat in this between my secondary attributes and my core attributes. And I have all the talents. Cool. I'm still only going to use 2 or 3 pieces of gear. This is just giving me what I like to call the Pokedex syndrome, which is basically like, oh, here's a list of things to collect. Go collect them. It is convenient. The convenience is amazing. But it depends on the loot system, and if the loot system does not work well, this doesn't work well. Takes forever. Especially given how many things there are to collect. All in all, it's a very good system. It does make things very much more convenient. So my pros are streamlined stat acquisition and build ease. It makes it easier to do a variety of builds. The cons, it gives you Pokedex syndrome, and you just start worrying about getting the highest number that you can for your bench until you get them all, and then it's kind of just there. The next topic I want to cover is enemies and AI. Unfortunately, right now, you have, let me go to my map, this world tier system that they introduced, which allows you to set your open world to any of these difficulties. Right now, normal is working as intended, hard is working as intended, challenging and heroic are not for anything above solo play and maybe 2-player. And what I mean by this is the developers promised us before the expansion that they were going to make it harder by increasing the the NPC intelligence. Basically, they would use their skills more effectively. They would use cover more effectively. Basically, they wouldn't just run at you like they used to and hope that they could burn you down before getting to you. And it was supposed to fix not only a lot of the problems with the AI in general, but the difficulty being too easy, which was a player concern before Warlords of New York. So everybody got excited and they said, hey, yeah, we're making them smarter. It'll be more difficult. You'll have to play more tactically. The way it is right now, scaling with the power reduction they gave players and the increase in health and armor that they gave enemies, the scaling is broken, and they didn't do, rather than make AI use their skills more effectively, they just basically gave them infinite use. So before, whereas a grenadier would throw 1 or 2 grenades at you, move, throw 1 or 2 grenades at you, move, throw 1 or 2 grenades at you. Now you have a grenadier who will sit in the same spot and launch grenade after grenade after grenade after grenade at you with no cooldown in how often he can throw those. You also have drone operators that, whereas before they could send drones out at you at the hardest difficulty maybe once every 10 seconds. So you would deal with those drones and then deal with the drone operator and then move on to your next priority target in an encounter. Now you're just sitting skeet shooting essentially drones, because as soon as one set of drones dies, they can immediately send out another set of drones. The AI was just not what was delivered, so, and the difficulty scaling is broken for multiplayer. I would say that the pros are, they did add a new difficulty, legendary for the most hardcore players, the 1% as they put it. So those players got a plus from it. The cons is a failure to deliver on their promises, and a failure to test for just the average player. They admitted that they tested those higher difficulties at those scalings with a perfect build, which anybody who works during the week and plays on the weekend, that's not them. They don't have the time to come up with those perfect builds, so they are locked out of that content. The next part I want to discuss is seasons. This was the other big thing that they promoted for Warlords New York, was the season system. And yeah, they delivered. It is a season system, a functional season system. It had a couple of hiccups early on. Everything is running smooth now. These included these manhunts, which was basically a continuation of the story that you got with the expansion. You get the West Side Leagues, or the Leagues. In this case, for the first league, it is a bunch of speedrun challenges and like set a certain number of enemies on fire and kill a certain number of elite enemies. So it's extra goals to work towards. I think they're cool. The manhunts are amazing. You pick up information on new NPCs that are causing trouble for the world. I think that's good. You get these global events like Polarity Switch, which are opt-in game mechanics that you can do. We'll see how that works out. And there's 3 months worth of activities here. They named this one Reanimated, but they won't just admit that it's a zombie event. And Guardians, we don't have any information on. I'm assuming the leagues are all going to be pretty similar. And the manhunts are going to be pretty similar. And at the end of the manhunts during the season, when you finally get that last target, you get a new skill once every 3 months, which is a bonus. So for pros and cons for the seasons, I'm going to go ahead and say that the pros is it's more content and it is fun content. The cons, it is more monetization on a game that most people already paid $90 for. It was $60 for the base game, unless you were one of the people who got it during their promotion for $3 like I did. And the expansion was $30. So for people who've been playing since the start, they've already invested $90 into this game. On the plus side, there's a free track, and I believe the leagues and events are free. Like, you don't have to pay the $10 to opt into them. I could be wrong. They kind of skated around that subject and just basically said, hey, you get this top track in this, and the only thing you pay the $10 for is the bottom track. And it made it sound like you got to play the leagues and events for free, but it wasn't technically confirmed. Like, they didn't flat out say, hey, you can do all of the content, the manhunts, the leagues, and the events for free. Like, there's no paywall there. Well, we'll see, because the leagues in their reward track have exotic caches, which is a free exotic. But I guess we'll see how that works. The last part is probably the most important when considering buying any expansion, and that is the actual story. I'm here in New York right now. I've been playing here for a little bit. In the expansion, you get this new zone, which is chopped up into 4 sections based on the targets that are found there. And I mean, the story is good, but it's not great. You get a few cutscenes. Most of the lore and information you're going to get about what is happening here is through audio logs, just like it was in the base game. You do get a few cutscenes for the bosses and stuff, and character introductions in case you didn't play the first game and don't know who those people are. And the new zone. You get the new zone, which is always great. More places, more missions, and everything. It suffers in the same way that the base Division 2 did, which is like, it's a good story. It's not a great story. And audio logs are where you're going to get most of your information. And it's basically more of the same, not bad, not good. I am going to not ruin anything for anybody who hasn't played the story yet. So I won't talk about the story too much outside of you hunt down a person who has been a problem since the first game, Aaron Keener. And I'm going to give the pros to it's more of the lore and story, and there is a twist ending that me and a lot of other people who are fans of the series did not see coming. The cons, it's more audio logs to stand still and listen to. There is not a lot of like cutscenes, which is understandable. It would be hard to do that in this game. And so for a conclusion, and I know I didn't show a lot of like hardcore gameplay, but that's because I needed to show you these systems and give examples of it, and without getting into a multiplayer match, with some people that some of the topics were hard to discuss as a solo player, or to show as a solo player. So for my conclusion, the end pro-con score for this expansion is pretty even at 10 pros and 12 cons across these topics, which, despite my personal love for the series as a whole, is pretty much par for the course. For everything the developers did do right, they did something equally wrong. That being said, I would have to score this expansion as a 6 out of 10 due to the misleading promises regarding the difficulty that they were going to fix and the intelligent AI and such and such. The onslaught of bugs that have plagued players, some of which have been extremely game-breaking since its launch. And the sheer fact that these systems were not tested before release. The scaling issue would have been very easily fixed had people tested those missions in groups with builds that were for like people who play an hour every weekend. They got maybe in the 50% range for their rolls on their builds. A more veteran player who plays more regularly, and like a hardcore player who has that perfect roll on everything. I think the scaling issue would have been fixed before release. Also, they would have seen that players are much less powerful now, despite the inflation to weapon numbers and so on, and armor numbers, because of the loss of the talents on those other pieces of gear and the changes to the mod system. I get one of the most important parts of any RPG is to make the player feel powerful. Players play games because they want to feel powerful and escape from their everyday lives of their normal. This game, before the expansion, you did feel like you were powerful. Maybe a little bit too powerful, but powerful. You were somebody that could write the events of the story, this global catastrophe. But as the game stands right now, unless you are running one of maybe 3 specific builds, you just kind of feel like a regular Joe shooting a BB gun at a tank. Is the best analogy that I can come up with. On challenging 4-player and challenging, or on in heroic 4 players, the amount of rounds that it takes to take down any given NPC, even the weakest, is ridiculous, even for the highest damage builds. Like, it's too much. You don't feel powerful. So yeah, that is my review of Warlords of New York. If you agreed or disagreed with any of the points that I made here, please leave a comment below. I will look at them. I will not promise that I will answer them. Thank you for watching. Have a blessed day. Stay healthy and stay safe.